Today's lesson is called Anne of Green Gables. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff.
My name is Roger. In today's program, we're going to continue talking about our featured work of literature for this month, Anne of Green Gables. And we sort of summarized what was happening. Of course, as you might guess, this book is about Anne of Green Gables. And there were some siblings there, Matthew and Marilla. And, of course, they needed to do some work on this farm because Matthew was getting old. He was getting on in years. So they needed to adopt a child from the local orphanage. They expected a boy, but what did they get? They got Anne, and they were disappointed at first, but later on they kind of grew to like her.
Yeah, Anne is talkative. She's full of life. So after a while, Matthew and Marilla Cuthbert, they warm to Anne. Apparently, Matthew, at the very beginning, takes a liking to Anne. It took a little while for Marilla, though, to come around, but Marilla and Anne, they kind of strike a bargain there, okay? She told Anne that she could stay at the farm there as long as she was obedient. Follow the rules and you can stay. Now, does that mean that the fiery redhead that is Anne there, that she can be obedient all the time? Well, not exactly. We learned at the end of the first day of our article there that Anne actually lost it. She lost her temper there because the town gossip said something that Anne didn't like. She became enraged. She screamed at this gossip named Mrs. Rachel, but eventually she was able to apologize and then smooth things over, and she could stay there at the farm. Anyways, Anne of Green Gables is the name of the story. Let's go ahead and start reading from the second part of this story. We'll do so right after this.
Before moving to Green Gables, Anne had only had imaginary friends, so she was delighted when she made some real friends at school. However, she also made one enemy, the handsome and smart Gilbert Blythe. Anne's dislike for Gilbert was triggered when he teased her by calling her carrots and pulling on her red braids. From that moment on, Anne tried to beat Gilbert in every endeavor.
各位好，第一部分我们看到形容词 imaginary 指想象中的、虚构的。例如 Devin writes books about imaginary creatures. Devin 撰写关于虚构生物的书籍。另外补充一个相关单字 imaginative I-M-A-G-I-N-A-T-I-V-E imaginative 这个字是形容词，指虚构的、富有想象力的。像是 The imaginative boy made up a game for his friends to play. 这个充满想象力的男孩创了一个游戏让朋友们玩。接着我们看到单字 trigger 这个字是动词，指引起、引发、促使。例如 The smell of flowers always triggers Alice's allergies. 花的香味总是会引发 Alice 的过敏。或是 The warm weather triggered new growth in the garden. 温暖的气候促使花园里出现新生机。另外这个字也可以当名词，指枪的扳机。我们可以说 The police had no idea who pulled the trigger. 警方完全不晓得是谁开枪。再来我们看到名词 endeavor 指努力、尝试。举例来说 The writer has gained recognition for his endeavors in the field of literature. 那名作家的努力在文学界得到了认可。另外这个字也可以当动词，指努力做点点点，尽力。像是You should endeavor to avoid grammar and spelling mistakes when writing this report. 撰写这份报告时，你该努力避免文法和拼字的错误。
Okay, let's summarize the first paragraph in today's lesson. It begins by saying, before moving to Green Gables, Anne had only had imaginary friends, so she was delighted when she made some real friends at school. Now remember, we're talking about an event that took place in the past before another event that took place in the past, so we are using the past perfect tense here. She had only had imaginary friends. She had had. Sounds kind of weird to have two hads so close together there, but that's how it works with the past perfect. She had only had imaginary friends before she moved to Green Gables. Now, if something's imaginary, it doesn't really exist. It exists only in the imagination of the imaginer.
There you go. So she would talk to them, I guess, and stuff like that. These are imaginary friends. And remember, Anne is creative and full of life. She's got a very, very powerful imagination, so it makes sense here that she could do this. She could make imaginary friends. Now, she did like her imaginary friends, and I'm sure they were really fun, but she was also delighted, super happy to make some real friends. No more imaginary friends anymore. You can make some real friends. By the way, if you are delighted by something, that makes you extremely happy. So there you go. These imaginary friends, they were fun for the time being, or back in the day, they were fun enough. But it's a lot better to have some real friends. Anne knows this, so she was delighted to make some real friends at school.
Delighted. Yes, you're happy. We often use this word when we meet somebody for the first time. For example, I could say, I'd like you to meet the new sheriff of Rock Ridge. I'd be delighted. I'm delighted to meet you. It's a pleasure to meet you, etc., etc. So she was delighted to have some real friends at school. However, she also made one enemy, the handsome and smart Gilbert Blythe. So this happens every once in a while, of course, as you know, when you go to school, there are people who are your friends, and then you've got your enemies, okay? Gee, can I think of my enemy back in school? I don't know, I was kind of quiet and withdrawn, so I didn't really have any friends, nor did I have any enemies, but sometimes we do have enemies, a person that we really dislike, and we have friction whenever we're close to them.
Yes, maybe your friends at every turn there, they're going to try to help you out with stuff, whereas an enemy might try to hurt you or outdo you and stuff like that. Yes, an enemy or a nemesis. It'll turn out here that Gilbert is kind of like a nemesis to Anne, but later on they kind of form a really long-lasting bond. But let's not let the cat out of the bag right now. Anyways, it says next, Anne's dislike for Gilbert was triggered when he teased her by calling her carrots and then by pulling on her red braids. Yes, here Anne, she's got the red hair, and she has put it into braids. That means she's kind of woven her hair together to kind of look like pieces of rope, and Gilbert decides to pull on these, and boy, Anne didn't like this one bit. Her dislike for Gilbert was triggered at that very moment.
Trigger, that's a verb here. Of course, when we see the word trigger, the first thing we think about is a gun. You pull the trigger in order to fire a bullet from the gun. But here, trigger is being used as a verb. It's just something that starts something to happen. For example, we could say, the new law triggered massive protests in the city, okay? Because of the new law, lots of people were upset. So protests began as a result. Protests were triggered by the passage of that new law. So here, her dislike for Gilbert was started when he called her names. He teased her by calling her carrots. As you know, carrots are kind of orange in color, just like red hair. It's kind of weird. Red hair is actually more orange than red, but we still call it red. So he called her carrots there, and then he actually pulled on her braids. When girls braid their hair together, usually they have two braids, one on each side. Those are braids. If it's just one in the back, then it is just a braid, but here she's got braids on both sides of her head. And I used to do this to my daughter when she was little. You take 3 strands, and then you move one over the other 2, back and forth, and you've got yourself a braid.
Anyways, after being called carrots and having her hair pulled on by this guy Gilbert, from that moment on, Anne tried to beat Gilbert in every endeavor, and boy, is she ever competitive. She is not going to let this guy win. Gilbert, when he teased her and then pulled on these red braids, he had no idea what he was getting himself into. From that point on, Anne said, Gilbert, you are going down. I'm going to try to beat you in every single thing that you do in every endeavor.
Endeavor, it's when you try to achieve a goal, basically, when you try to do something. So, yeah, whenever they try to do something in school, whether it be to pass a test or to perform well in PE class, we could call those things endeavors. Okay, an endeavor can also be a verb. I could say, I'm endeavoring to create a mnemonic memory circuit using stone knives and bearskins. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's now listen to the second part.
At 16, Anne, along with several of her classmates, including Gilbert, went to Queen's Academy to earn their teaching licenses. Anne completed the course and was awarded a scholarship to a 4-year college in Nova Scotia. She went home to share the good news, but her joy was short-lived, for Matthew died of a heart attack and Marilla was going blind.
第二部分我们看到单字 license 这个字是名词，指执照、证书、许可证。例如 You have to take 2 tests to get your driver's license. 你必须考2种考试来取得驾照。或是 My friend applied for a license to sell liquor at his cafe. 我朋友为他的咖啡店申请酒类销售许可。另外补充一个相关片语 A license to do something 表示允许做坏事或非法事情，像是 Just because you did well in the end of year exams, it doesn't give you a license to become lazy. 只因为你在年终考试表现优异，不代表你就有偷懒的权利。
Okay, moving on. At 16, or at the age of 16, Anne, along with several of her classmates, including Gilbert, went to Queen's Academy to earn their teaching licenses. So fast forward, okay? Anne, before the break there, had just entered school, had just encountered Gilbert, and I guess they went to school together through the years together, and then at age 16, we pick up our story again. And yes, Anne, her classmates, and hey, Gilbert is along as well. They're all going to this place called Queen's Academy because they want to earn their teaching licenses. By the way, here a license is a document that comes from the government or from some source of authority that allows you to do something legally. Okay, so let's say you go and you buy a car. You can't really drive that car on the road in a city, let's say, unless you have a driver's license. Okay, once you have that document, that little card there, you are legally allowed to drive. And the same thing goes for teaching. If you want to teach at a public school or a good private school or something like that, you're going to need to have a teacher's license. The government, they know that you know what you're doing, so they give you a license. They allow you to legally teach. And apparently, Anne, her friends, her classmates, including Gilbert, they go to this academy because they want to earn teaching licenses. They want to become professional teachers.
Yeah, they'll probably get some degrees, but they'll also get their teaching license at this academy. An academy is a special kind of educational institution. It could refer to a private school, or it could refer to some kind of college or university. It depends on the place. Now, Anne completed the course and was awarded a scholarship to a 4-year college in Nova Scotia. Of course, Nova Scotia is one of the Canadian provinces out there in the east. I think Halifax is the capital. And she went home to share the good news, but her joy was short-lived, for Matthew died of a heart attack and Marilla was going blind. My goodness, there are lots of problems there at the home there. Of course, she was happy that she was able to go to this 4-year college with a scholarship. Somebody's going to help her attend there. They're going to help her pay for her tuition. But she got back home and there was some bad news. Her happiness was short-lived. It did not last a long time because Matthew was dead. He died. He had a heart attack and passed away. And then we've got Marilla having some problems. She was going blind. She was losing the ability to see.
Oh no, what a tragedy. Matthew is dead now and Marilla is going blind. Who's going to take care of Green Gables, the farm and the house there? It's at this point that Anne realizes that, well, she can't go to Nova Scotia. She's going to have to stay closer to home to help Marilla out and to keep the farm there at Green Gables from falling into disrepair. Anyways, folks, with that, it's time for us to take a short break, but don't go away. We'll be back to wrap up our story after this.
To keep Marilla company, Anne decided to give up her scholarship and move back home. When Gilbert heard about Anne's sacrifice, he decided to give his teaching position at Avonlea School to her. Anne was deeply touched by Gilbert's act of kindness, and the two became friends. Although Anne realized that her future path had narrowed, she knew that at every turn there would be the chance of happiness.
最后第三部分，我们看到片语 keep somebody company 表示与某人作伴，陪伴某人，像是 If you're not feeling well, I can come by your house to keep you company this weekend. 如果你觉得不舒服，我这个周末可以到你家陪你。另外补充一个同义片语 accompany somebody, A-C-C-O-M-P-A-N-Y, accompany somebody. 例如 Richard offered to accompany Olivia on the trip to 台中。Richard 自愿提出要陪 Olivia 去台中旅行。
Okay, here's the final part of today's lesson, and we finish up our summary of Anne of Green Gables. So here, the third part begins with the first sentence, which reads, To keep Marilla company, Anne decided to give up her scholarship and move back home. So she's making a personal sacrifice here for the family, or at least the people who adopted her. And at the beginning of this sentence, we've got the phrase, to keep someone company. That just means to be with them so they don't have to feel lonely, so they have someone to talk to, and they can do lots of things together. So yes, you want to keep someone company. Maybe, for example, you've got your old parents living down in Jiayi or Zhanghua or whatever, and they're all by themselves. So maybe you'll quit your job up here in Taipei and live with them and keep them company so they don't feel lonely, and you can do things for them like go shopping for them or pick them up when they fall on the floor.
There you go. Anne never had family outside of Matthew and Marilla, so at this point she knows what she has to do. She wants to keep Marilla company in her old age as she is going blind, so Anne decided to give up her scholarship and she moved back home to be with her Marilla. Now, when Gilbert heard about Anne's sacrifice, i.e., when he heard that she had given up her scholarship, he decided to give his teaching position at Avonlea School to her. So there you go. Gilbert hears about this and he goes, wow, she gave up a scholarship to go to Nova Scotia and study for 4 years? Oh my goodness, what a sacrifice. I've got to do something. So he gave up his teaching position so that Anne there could teach at the Avonlea School while she's back there with Marilla.
Okay, so I guess she can teach and then stay at home and keep Marilla company, kind of part-time there. So that's kind of a big sacrifice from Gilbert there. He's a nice fella. He gives up his teaching position so she can take that position. And Anne was deeply touched by Gilbert's act of kindness, very much touched emotionally and recognized that favor, and the two became friends. So remember, Gilbert was the one who pulled on her braids and called her carrots. So they were enemies before, but now they are the best of friends.
There you go. After a while, they did form a lasting bond, a lasting friendship. Now, although Anne realized that her future path had narrowed, she knew that at every turn there would be the chance of happiness. All right, folks, with that, it's time for us to say bye-bye for now. But don't worry, don't fret, the Chinese teacher is on her way.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点，读到课文最后一句 Although Anne realized that her future path had narrowed, she knew that at every turn there would be the chance of happiness. 好，句子里面的 at every turn 字面意思是每个转弯处，它是用来表达每次、总是或者是处处怎么样怎么样，可以用来表达每当你要尝试去做某件事的时候，总是会遇到什么样的情况。好，那顺便补充几个跟 turn 当名词有关的片语。好，第一个是 twists and turns，它是指说迂回曲折，其中的 twist 和 turn 都有转弯或是弯曲处的意思。那么 twists and turns 就可以表达意外的发展或是转变。例如 The story is full of twists and turns， 就是说这个故事它充满了意外转折。第二个补充的片语是 take a turn for the better，其中的 turn 是当名词表示转变，那么 the better 表示更好的情况，所以 take a turn for the better 字面意思是往更好的情况转变，往更好情况发展，那就是用来表达情况好转。相反的 take a turn for the worse 表示情况突然恶化，急转直下。好，例如 Their relationship took a turn for the worse， 他们的关系急转直下。好，第三个补充的是 take turns， 表示轮流，其中的 turns 固定要用复数，那我们可以用 take turns 加上动词 ing 来表达轮流做某事。例如The kids took turns playing on the slide. 小朋友们轮流玩溜滑梯。好，那么第四个补充的是 in turn。好， in turn 它有两种用法哦。第一种呢是表达接着、进而、转而怎么样。那它的意思跟这个 as a result 蛮相近的，通常就是指说一连串的行动或是事件影响到其他的情况。例如 One of the twins started crying,which in turn caused the other to cry. 那对双胞胎的其中一个宝宝开始哭，那接着就造成另外一个也哭了。好，接着看到第二个 in turn 的用法是表达依序地或是轮流地，那么它是用来表达依序进行，像是 The principal shook hands with each of us in turn. 校长依序跟我们每个人握手。那补充一下哦，by turns 它也有轮流交替的意思，可是呢 by turn 它是指没有固定顺序的交替着。举例来说 The movie made me laugh and cry by turns， 就是说那部电影让我时而欢笑时而哭泣，有时候笑有时候哭，这是不一定的顺序，就是一直这样子交替着。好，以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天的单字吧。
Imaginary. The imaginary world created by the author draws his readers in. Delighted. Sarah was delighted to hear that her sister was coming to visit. Braid. The hairstylist created a fancy braid in the bride's hair. Endeavor. Climbing that mountain will be a difficult endeavor. Academy. After attending the academy, the students went on to get higher degrees. License. The doctor's medical licenses hung on the wall in his office.
Discussion Starter starts now!
Here's our discussion starter for the day, and the question is, it's kind of a long one here. Montgomery novels about Anne Shirley have been turned into movies, TV series, and plays. In your opinion, why is this character so popular?
Oh, Anne Shirley's timeless appeal is due to her style. I've got to say it. She's got quite a style about her, okay? Very often when people watch Anne Shirley, she deals with things in a really stylish way. Now, what do I mean by that? It means that whenever I watch these movies, these novels, I think, I wish I would have handled certain situations in the way that Anne does. Usually she handles these things with wit and with energy and with life. She's full of style.
Well, I think it's Anne's red hair that most people like. We've had plenty of stories about women with brunette hair or blonde hair or with afro puffs or whatever. But in this particular case, we just don't have a lot of stories about red hair, because if it becomes a movie or a play, we can see their red hair and we can see all their freckles. It's really cool.
Okay, everyone. With that, today's article is now complete. But, as always, we sure hope that you guys have enjoyed reading along with us. Anyways, I'm Jeff.
I am Roger.
See you next time.